Welcome back to Finally Seen. Today's conversation explores what it really means to be seen after years of trauma. My guest is Beth Jones, a two-time best-selling author, healing mentor, and founder of Empowered Survivors. And for 3 decades, she had worked as a senior forensic investigator with global firms, uncovering corporate fraud around the world. At the same time, she was carrying unprocessed childhood trauma and living behind what she describes as a 45-year wall built for survival. But in 2020, a hypnotherapy session uncovered truths she had buried for decades and initiated a profound transformation. Today, she's the creator of Heal Framework, host of the podcast Let's Heal with Beth Jones, and author of Becoming an Empowered Survivor. Her work bridges corporate leadership and deep personal healing, showing that transformation is possible and that purpose can emerge from pain. Beth, I am so excited that you are joining me today. I am very, very ecstatic. How are you?
Oh, Chrissy, thanks so much for having me. And I am wonderful today. I'm having a really great day. And thanks for that amazing introduction. I actually might need it. So well done. Thank you.
Well, it was pretty easy to work with what you gave me. I mean, you've done some pretty amazing stuff. And I want to dive into how the heck you transitioned into a healing mentor. I know I mentioned a little bit in the opening, but let's dive into that.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you mentioned, I spent a little more than 30 years doing something very, very different in the corporate world and investigating all kinds of crazy things that were happening inside of organizations that allegedly and arguably were violations of laws around the world. And that was my specialization, was helping to uncover the facts and help organizations to be able to report the facts, what happened, right? And then deal with whatever fallout would be coming from that, whatever it may be, dealing with regulators and governmental agencies, going through the court process, if there were civil lawsuits, that type of thing, right? So I was a fact finder. That's what I did for a really long time. The irony of that is that I could never apply those same skills to myself until it came a point in time for me to heal. So I had a life-altering event about 6 years ago. You mentioned the hypnotherapy session. And the person who walked into that hypnotherapy room that day didn't walk out. So the version of Beth who walked in, died. And the version of Beth who walked out was me, who would go on to shed that former career, go through radical personal and professional transformation, where I have become the healing mentor. And that really is in response to me living in my purpose. Right? Wow. So I'm one of those single purpose people.
That's incredible. It sounds like that past job was probably pretty hard on your nervous system on top of dealing with that wall that you were talking about. Wow. And so after that hypnotherapy session, did you just go in and quit, or what did that look like?
No, it was interesting that you say that about the dysregulation that I would have been in from that job, because that's very true. I could get dysregulated. I do have a very high capacity for managing stress. Nice. And I am really good at directing a team through large and complex projects, right? Big projects, lots of people all over the world, lots of moving parts, lots of people asking a million different questions. And they all want answers yesterday. And that can go on. I've had some cases where that went on for 4 and 5 years. Wow. Right? And so I have a high capacity to manage stress. And I didn't know this at the time, but when I've looked back over my life, I can definitely see that there was dysregulation in my life. And a lot of that actually was showing up personally. So it was almost like my former career, because I was really good at what I did and I enjoyed the work. It was almost like it was giving me buoyancy and helping me run through my life, where my personal life was basically hidden. And I was hiding myself. You mentioned the 45-year wall that I found myself behind post hypnotherapy. When I came back to conscious awareness, I hit the inside of that wall and became aware of that wall for the first time in my life. And what I know now is that I suffered child sexual abuse when I was 5, and I was chained to the foundation of that wall at that point in time. And I just built it up around me to survive and protect myself. And what that meant personally is that I was unable to emote. I became emotionless. And every emotion that I was having personally got stuck inside of me, which created more dysregulation within me. But that dysregulation really just caused me to be flat and to not be able to engage in deep relationships with
Yeah.
people, like really get down to know people. And it's funny because I went to the whole reason I went to hypnotherapy is because I knew I was having trouble making deep, authentic connections with people. And I'd taken a new role in my job that was going to require me to go even deeper and more authentic in my connection. Previously, when I was managing the cases, my job and connecting with people was really about getting everybody through the process, right? So it's very task oriented, process oriented.
Oh, so
This
you have
role was much more about forging relationships because I was taking on a significant leadership role. So it was about building relationships with our clients and building relationships with my team. So it was different the way that I was going to interact. And I felt nervous about that, like anxiety. And I was constrained. And I was like, what is this? And so I ended up in hypnotherapy for that reason. And of course, the reason that I felt that way came to light over time, right? And it
wow.
goes back to having been sexually abused when I was so young at 5, which is a pivotal time. It's when we're all in the process of forming our world views, even
Yeah.
as children, even much younger than that. And then I had some other things that happened to me that were quite traumatic, sort of the big T trauma things that we talk about when I was in high school. I was date raped in high school and then bullying. And all throughout that, sprinkled throughout that, throughout my life for many, many years, were dysfunctional relationships in my family growing up. And then, now, at least at a certain point in time, my marriage, my former marriage, became dysfunctional. Like for me, at least, it was not serving me anymore. And I lived in that for quite a long time.
Which makes
So
sense
personally,
that
that
all that
relationship was,
compounded from that
yes,
very first instance because you never had an opportunity to really heal from that. You were
that's
too
right.
young, and obviously the adults in your life failed you at the time. And so, yeah, I mean, it's not surprising.
No. So I feel like the work was, as I said before, it was kind of a, life raft, it was something that, and really, I've also talked about it before about it being a form of escape for me because it was so demanding and I could literally pour myself into it for
Yeah.
hours in a day. And I traveled a lot. And so I was in a different environment, which was all part of the escape mechanism that I made my job to be as I was going through that part of my life.
I think a lot of high functioning women are like that.
Mm,
I know myself, I dive into my work if there's something, that maybe I'm not realizing that I'm not facing or stuff's getting stressful elsewhere. It's like, oh, just dive in. So
yeah,
I think that
agreed.
a lot of high functioning
Yeah.
women are like that. We look okay on the outside and boy, they sure are successful, but inside it's like, ugh.
Yeah, we're dying. I mean, dying. I said that already, right? I mean, that version of me ended up dead, right? And is gone. And now it's this version of me, which is much more joyful and peaceful and happy and can actually engage in deep, loving relationships across a lot of different types of relationships, right? So it's a much better place to be today than where I was.
I think the yellow that you wear and use that really, it's just like your sunshine now. And
Yes.
I think it's
Yes, this is a happy story. It's important to me. And that color yellow, actually, I mean, it's one of my favorite colors, but it also came to be because it's one of the primary colors on the cover of my book. And the way that I love color, right? I mean, you look around my house, you see color everywhere. But it really became very important to me to bring this feeling and this view into my journey because so often when people are talking about the healing journey and talking about even recovering from and being in a much healthier place post what I've been through in my life, there's still a shade of darkness around that, right? And I find like if you look at like other books that I've looked at around healing journeys and the idea of forgiveness, for example, which is where my journey to write my book even began, was doing research on what are books that are out there about forgiveness. And so many of them had dark covers. And I was like, no, 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 this is a happy story. And we need to show that right from the very beginning that this is a happy story.
I love that.
Yeah.
And that's one of your big differentiators is that you really show that the light can come from those dark times and that you can stand in the light and just push the shadows away. And I
Yes.
really love that. That really makes it a big makes a big
Thank you.
difference. Um, I guess one of the things I know we've talked about outside of this is you are really adamant about it's not just one thing that helps a person heal, which is how you came up with your framework. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, the HEAL framework, the word HEAL for me is an acronym that means to hope, evolve, and love. And that's because that summarizes what my healing journey has been like, what it continues to be like, and what I know to be a healing journey that actually works. And the first element of that is hope and all the different ways that we build and foster hope in our life. And that's actually the fuel that keeps us going when the journey gets tough, because healing just can be really hard and painful sometimes. I mean, it just flat sucks sometimes. And that's just the truth, right? But we can get past it, and hope helps us to do that. The E for me means to evolve, and that's in two parts. So the first of that is the use of a wide variety of tools that we then use to keep us moving, but really to do deep self-discovery work where we learn about who we are, what's happened to us, why we have survived the way that we have survived, what we don't know about our emotional needs and our gifts and our strengths, what we don't know about our triggers. We get to really dig in through a process of self-discovery and really significantly up level our self-awareness, right? It's about discovering who are we at our core. And once we do that, we can then begin to have self-love. And then my experience is that self-love then gives way to your ability to love in other types of relationships. You can show up for yourself. That means that you can show up in love for other people. And so moving from the survivor, and even if you don't identify yourself as a survivor, so somebody who is living in a life where they're just surviving, or you're just struggling to make it day by day, moving from that place to this joyful, peaceful place where your life is filled with love, that really requires us to focus on ourselves. And there's not a magic bullet to say, how do I go in and excavate myself and find out who I am, right? You've got to figure out what is it that works for you. There's no process. There's no steps. There's no 1, 2, 3, 4 and poof, you're healed and you can go on with your life. And so, for me, there are different tools that I use that help me to work through events that I've been through in my life. There are tools that I use that help me for emotional regulation. And that is both about release of emotion, but also being able to get myself through the emoting process, particularly when those emotions are lower level emotions, right? And so, a good example for me of something that I use quite a lot is being out in nature. And that's because it's soul nourishing for me. And there's an energy in nature that I really need to connect with by physically being outside of walls and present in nature, right? And I can do a significant amount of processing when I'm in that environment. And if I'm moving at a cadence and a faster cadence, I can go into different levels of processing, whether it's something really difficult that's happened to me that I need to get through, or emotions that I'm getting out, right? And then the other part of the tools is building a tool set. So we use a lot of them to get past the challenges in our life. And we do it for the first time when we're gathering up the tools and figuring out all of the things that work for us. And we're able to heal the first time, but what we're doing, or heal at that moment, wherever we've made it, right? And so how far I've healed to this point, but we're always going to be healing, just as I'm always healing. And that's because so much of the pain that we experience as human beings comes from our human to human interactions. And the only way to end that type of pain is to become a hermit. Or not, right? And none of us want to do that, right? I mean, that's not why we're here on this earth. And that's not what the human experience is meant to be.
Right.
So those tools help us then to be able to continue to stay in this healthy place. And a lot of it is this constant learning that we're going through, and a constant evolution, constantly becoming our higher and best self and becoming the person who God intended us to be, stripping off our traumas, stripping off our conditioning, human conditioning, survival responses, so that we are the highest and best version of ourselves. But that is a journey, because even as much work as I've done today to become much more healthy than I used to be, I'm still involved in relationships that are healing, or where there are things that are happened happening to me where I still need to heal. The difference for me today is that I am much more resilient, and the process for me to get through the emotions that come with the events, they go through much quicker, right? So I'm not stuck in darkness and despair and crying and anger. I'm not stuck in that place for months on end, which I've been in that place before.
Yeah.
Now I can, like recently I was actually writing in my journal not too long ago about going through a grief cycle, an entire grief cycle in a matter of days. And that's because I practice
Yeah.
and I know what to do with my tools to help get me through it. Right. And so, of course, trauma therapy has been huge for me. I do a lot of writing. My writing journey started with journaling, as it does for many of us as we heal. And I do that today to get emotions out, to record events. I'm a writer. I don't want to lose some of these things, but it's also a cathartic process of putting it on paper, and I can say whatever I want on paper. And the only person who knows what's on the paper is me. And the only other being in this universe who knows what's on that paper is God. And that's okay. Right. And so running, I mentioned running, being in nature. I do a lot of meditation. I love sound therapy. So meditative music that has megahertz frequencies that resonate with me, that I can actually feel in my body. Yeah. And so all of these things are about, building that tool set where I can learn more and more about who I am and always be working, as I said, to be my highest and best self.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right, it's an ongoing thing. And the more you learn about yourself, the more you discover what tools will work for you. And you're right, it does make it so much easier to metabolize those emotions faster. And I tell people this all the time: is my life less stressful now than it was years ago when I started on this, journey? And no, but I'm less stressed about it because I have my tools. And I can quickly, like you said, go through a cycle. Okay. And next. And so I love that. I love that you brought up the music. Do you have favorite, like, where do you go to get your favorite music?
So 632 is my favorite vibrational frequency. And so I just go into Spotify and 632, and that is what really resonates with me a lot.
I love 444 and 888. Those are my favorites. Yeah. And I saw recently somebody was talking about how classical music pairs with certain frequencies for healing. And Moonlight Sonata it's always been my favorite classical song. And it was matched with nervous system healing. And I was like, that makes sense.
It does make a lot of sense. I'm going to have to go listen to that again. I have to go listen to that.
It's always been one of those. Like, I can remember before I changed my major to journalism, I was a music major. And so I remember, learning to play that on the piano and just how it would just touch my soul. And I loved that song. So it made sense.
Yes.
And I know we've talked about some somatic things. A lot of times people, when they hear somatic, they're like, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what your experience with that?
Yeah. So my experience with somatics has a lot really to do with movement. And, actually one of the first, so I've, one of the things that I do as the healing mentor, and one of the reasons that God has me here is to experiment with a lot of these tools and modalities so that then I can share my experience with other people and, hopefully take some of maybe the mystery or stigma out of some of those modalities. Right. And so, one of the very first experiences that I had was with a Reiki master who was also a somatic movement specialist. And, remember when I said earlier that in my past, I was unable to emote, and we talked about the wall that I lived behind. And so you can imagine when those two things come together in a person, I was very rigid, right? I didn't have fluidity in my body, and I had no idea. And so I went to her for 2 or 3 sessions, and, as therapy goes, the process of getting in with a therapist takes a long time, because what are you here for? And there's the whole background and all that you have to go through. And so I probably had, 3 sessions with her where we're sort of talking about what I thought I was dealing with acutely. And at this time I had no idea about the big T trauma that I had been through, like full conscious awareness of the big T trauma. So I didn't really know why I was in therapy. And that is true about years of therapy that I went through before I actually got into trauma therapy. after I had my hypnotherapy, which is what really was one of the, this really helped me to progress. But the somatic movement therapist could see like the rigidity in my body because she was trying to get me to move around. And so she as a therapist and somebody who was a trained Reiki master and actually quite good and quite skilled at what she was doing and her own, her own empathic self and her intuition, like she could sort of sense that there was something there, right? And maybe a lot of stuff there that she could sense. And so I was frustrated the first couple of times that I was with her because nothing was happening. And so the third time that I was there, she really focused on me having my body move kind of in like an S shape. And, um, and she was doing some Reiki work on me at the same time. And there was the sound therapy as well. And I don't know what happened at some point in time. Like there was an inflection point where the movement and what she was doing in the sound therapy just all converged together. And I just had this flood of emotion that came out of me for the first time. And it was almost like the cork on a champagne bottle exploding, when it does, like if you really Shane's fizzy, it's just going to go crazy when it explodes out. That's almost what this was. And I was able to tell the story for the first time about the traumatic loss of one of my dogs. So she had been viciously attacked and killed by another dog. And I carried a lot of shame and guilt for that event because I had allowed the other dog to be on my property with my beloved dog, Steele. And I had seen them interacting in a way that I knew that there was a lot of tension between them. And, there was a series of events that happened where we were away from the property for a while and 2 dogs and some of our other dogs were together and Steele ended up paying the price because I, in my own like haste to continue escaping my life, and that's what was happening, my focus on me to escape Steele paid the ultimate price and it crushed me. And it was really traumatic for me. And I don't have kids. And so, I don't have 2-legged children. 4 legs and feathers are the kind of children I've had throughout my life. And so it was really devastating for me when she died. And I carried a lot of guilt and shame because I knew I could have saved her had I been more focused on her, what was happening than me. Right. But I carried that for a few years and like, I couldn't tell anybody what had happened to her. It was just so lodged in me. And so it came out that day. And it was the first time that I was able to actually speak the words about what had happened and how I was feeling like I was carrying, and I think, as the healing process that you've been through your journey. And one thing that I say to everyone, the most freeing moment in any of the trauma that we go through is the first time that we speak it and get it out of ourselves, right? I mean, because it's like that cork, right? Those can be like corks, a series of corks inside of us. And if we don't let that out somehow, then, we just stay in that painful, bound up place for our entire life if we don't get it out, right? And so speaking it is so freeing. It's so liberating. And any of us who've experienced trauma, whatever trauma we've been through, even that I can tell you that I know that I could have prevented and I blamed myself. At the end of the day, I know it wasn't my fault, right? And I can't carry that with me, right? It was a tragic series of events that happened. A lot of people making a lot of decisions and doing a lot of things. It wasn't just me. And I've been able to forgive myself for that. But until that moment, that was just stuck inside. And I had no idea that day. And so when it came out as this rush of emotion, and I have so much sadness and anger at the same time coming out, I believe that only could have been possible through the somatic therapy that I was going through that day. And like I say, I don't know what it was about the combination of the movement, the Reiki, and the sound, but it was the right combination that let me get it out. Now, I will say, as I've gone on and used other modalities, I don't need like a combination of them all at one time. And I think a lot of that is because, I am not very intentional about my healing process. And I have been since I got on my healing path. It was a couple of years after that somatic therapy, before I had the hypnotherapy. So even though I had let that, I was still carrying, a lot of the other stuff that I had experienced when I was younger. And so probably for another couple of years before I got to the hypnotherapy. But once I came through that and I realized like I'm suffering, I'm in pain, and like there's some stuff I need to deal with from my past and free myself, right? And once I realized that I was a survivor, but not only that I was a survivor, that I could heal because I was reading and hearing stories about other survivors who had healed. I knew it was possible. I committed to myself and I was very intentional and focused about walking through that. And so now when I engage with the modality, it's very much, I go into it. I don't know anything about it. Brand new, right? Family constellation work is a great example that I've been doing for the last year, right? I don't know anything about it. I'd read about it, which you read on the internet was all wrong. It's not how, at least what I've experienced, has worked. Very profound healing process for me that I've been through with that. But what I do now is I go into it fully open-minded, right? And I believe that, God created everything that is in this universe, and everything therefore in this universe can be used for good if our intention is pure and is good, right? And so I can use any kind of modality to help me heal because I know that it's been presented to me and it's here, I can benefit from it. I go into it eyes wide open and very much what's coming for me. I don't go into it with an intention of I'm going to heal this, because for me, most of the times I didn't know what I was healing. I'm learning it. I've learned it along the way. Right. And I think that's true for many of us.
Yeah.
But being very present and very open to the modality, unless I just can't get a rapport with the provider for some reason. And it does happen. I mean, I've had that happen plenty. I'm a lot more careful now about the energy of the person who I'm going to work with. And do I have a rapport instantly? Like, I actually like this person. I think I can work with them. I didn't do that in the past when I did years of what I call couch therapy, right? And now I do. And so because I'm in that space of believing that this person can help me, I have some amazing experiences. Right. Amazing healing experiences. And so, I can do it one by one, the different modalities now, and not have to have that combination that I've just described around the somatics that broke me free. Right. But, so I've mentioned Reiki a couple of times. I do Reiki work, now separately and on its own with a wonderful woman here in the Dallas, Fort Worth Metroplex area, who is a brilliant Reiki master, different, the one that I used before around the somatic therapy. She was in, Hong Kong, where I was living at the time when I was going through a lot of that. The other thing I'll say about somatics where I've had a lot of benefit has been with inner child healing. And again, the person that that I've worked with and who I know really can do some very profound work here. So I've done a lot of inner child healing work myself, a lot of it through trauma therapy and just, walking that journey myself, identifying them and being able to work with them and help them through our healing journey. But, the inner child, so many of us, our inner child, we lose our inner child or we get stuck at a certain point with the inner child. So for me, I have a 5-year-old who's the first one who was abused that I know, the first version of me that I now know today was abused. I don't know if something happened earlier than that or not, but my 5-year-old, her entire existence in her life has been about hiding. And so that's what happens to us when we're young, right? There's a version of us that can get stuck inside and is there for a particular purpose. And our inner children are there to protect us or to give us, some sort of a power to a characteristic or a trait that we may have naturally, right? And so I've been working with her for a long time. And one of the things that's really helped me, it's a child that I'm dealing with. And that child of mine lost innocence. And with that innocence went being a child, right? I had to grow up way earlier than I should have at 5. So even the idea of play, right? That is something that we can use, dress up, right? However you may do it. I had, this friend of mine, she talks about, as an adult woman, you want to play dress up, well, you don't have to buy all the clothes. You just go on a shopping spree and you're going in and trying everything on, right? But you don't have to buy anything, right? You can just go in all the dressing rooms and try on whatever you want to try on, right? And you can actually dress up that way, right? Dress up as somebody or something that you're not going to buy, right? I mean, I could go and buy I could go try on some Cinderella ball gown somewhere if I wanted to as part of the princess work, right? That many young girls go through, right? Their princess phase, right? And some hold on to it, some lose it. But if I wanted to work on that, I could do it that way. And that is a form of somatic therapy that's helping me to connect and to nurture and love that child, that part of me that didn't get that loving and that nurturing, right? So, somatics, it works in a lot of different ways, but for me, a lot of it comes around to actual, some sort of movement therapy, right? Where we're working to get something that'll release something that's inside of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And, I know a lot of people hear Reiki and they think, oh my gosh, that's woo. That's so like new age. I can't do it. And once you actually learn about it, it's really just quantum science. And it's just it's like, it's really not
Yes.
magic. It's just science. So
Yeah, I mean, there's not anything that we engage in that's magic, right? I mean, I said it before, and I genuinely believe this. God created everything that's in the universe, and the way that we use it is really about our intention. And so, if my intention is that I think this is magic, or I'm looking for a magic rule, I'm probably going to be pretty dissatisfied with my experience because it's not right. And if I were a dark person who had some sort of dark purpose, well, that happens, right? In the way that tools get used. But, Reiki, you're right, is in that woo space. But as I mentioned, I've had some profound experiences with Reiki. I do a lot of my healing visually, and I don't know, I actually, went to college originally to become a graphics art designer. And there's like the starving artist part of me that wants to come out. And so a lot of my healing has been very visual. And I do a lot of that. I've had a lot of success with that in Reiki and actually having the ability to observe current situations, actually recent situation, actually sort of know what is happening in the situation, like something that might be happening in a relationship, for example. Right. And I've had some profound healing experiences. I have what I call now the 7 chapters of healing the relationship with my grandfather, who was the person who abused me when I was a child, when I was 5. And, he died long before I started my healing journey. And so I can now look back over the process with him. And I've literally got through 7 chapters, including the last chapter being through what I know as the 7th and last chapter now. Maybe it's not completely done, but this is where I am with him at this point. And the last chapter that I've been through was in a Reiki session where I had the opportunity to see him as a child. And I saw his eyes when he himself was a 5 or 6-year-old boy. And I saw the innocence and the love in his eyes before he experienced whatever he's been through or had been through in his life that caused him to be the man who was really a very mean and difficult person. But that, I know that comes from his own pain and trauma and suffering and whatever he had been through. I don't really know the details of that. But clearly he had been through some things that made him just mean, kind of a mean person, and I had the opportunity. And so a lot of what I talk about in the 7 chapters are focused on his eyes, where I've seen his eyes in a predatory way. When I was in college, I would spend time with my grandparents. Again, this is before I really had conscious awareness of what had happened to me with him. And I would spend time, weekends and holidays. And so I would spend with my grandparents. I can remember these predatory eyes looking at me like, if you see the National Geographic documentaries where they show like the wolf stalking its prey or the lion stalking its prey, and you see those wild hunting predatory eyes. I've seen those eyes in my grandfather. And so much of my healing has been centered on his eyes. So it's no surprise that one of the last major things that I've been through is having the opportunity, and I believe God showing me his eyes, showing me the innocence and the love in him that was there before he experienced what he experienced. Right. So, if you want to say Reiki is woo with what I just described to you about the experience that I've had, that's not woo, that's healing. And that was profound for me. And I might get a little bit emotional. That's because one of the things that I say to people, when we go through the evolved process that I described previously, and we're in that pivot point of self-love, what's also happening in my experience is that because we are accepting ourselves and coming to love ourselves as a survivor with everything that we've been through, suddenly there's a mirroring effect to that. And you have the ability to realize, and some people might reject it fully, but you do have the ability in that moment to realize that the person who caused you pain is also a survivor. And what they were doing to you was really out of a place of survival more than just, you're just a mean, crappy human being, right? It's really more hurt people hurt.
Yeah.
Right. The phrase we hear a lot. Right. And so the first time that I ever knew that and had realization of that and saw that was on this journey that I've been through to heal the relationship with my grandfather. Right. And that came very early in the healing journey as my own self-discovery was giving way to my exploration of love, which began with him. He was the first relationship that I worked on to heal. Right. And so I don't, if you read that whole story, and you can find it, you can hear me talking about it. So you can find it like, if you want to DM me or whatever, send a comment on it. I'll send you. I can send you the blog post, or I can send you the YouTube video where I've talked about this. But that's not woo. The modalities that I've used and the experiences that I had, when I tell you that as a conscious human being sitting right here, I remember at 17, 18, when I was in college with my grandparents, I remember those eyes. That was a very real human experience. And now I'm telling you that more recently through Reiki, I'm having experiences again that are focused on his eyes. And I have, it's sort of been the theme of healing with him, right? That's healing. That's God changing that relationship for me as I've gone through those different stages.
Well, and I haven't gone completely into this, but I know that scientists are now starting to discover that the past version of a particle can actually be changed through quantum science. And I feel like it's kind of like that with our brains, that, we can remember something differently. And there's also a brilliant graph that shows how different people can see the same situation differently. And
yes,
it's all just science, and it's fascinating to me. But I'm glad that you went into that about seeing him as a 5-year-old and seeing that, because you're right, hurt people, and the more people realize that there are a variety of tools, it's not just therapy. I think a lot of people think they just have to go to regular, like you call couch therapy, and they'll be in there for years talking about these situations and blah, blah, blah. And earlier you mentioned trauma therapy. I want you to go further into that, because I know there's a difference and a lot of people don't realize that.
Tired of overpriced energy drinks full of junk? Same. That's why I use Babello, a self-carbonating hydration packet that gives you clean energy, electrolytes, and vitamins without the crash. Just add water, shake, and sip. It's way more affordable than typical energy drinks and way better for you. Use code ChrissyBernal15 at checkout to get 15% off at drinkbabello.com. Hydration just got an upgrade.
Sure. And my therapist, I love her. She doesn't like it when I call it couch therapy. And the reason I call it that is because that's what it was for me. I sat on the couches of therapists off and on for 25 years. And that was because I had this pulling inside of me that I needed help, but I had no idea what I needed help for. And so, I could sit on their couches and we would have a conversation. Really the things that would pivot me into the place where I would just start crying just uncontrollably, just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing, would be anything that touched on my father or anything that touched on my now ex-husband. Right. And clearly two very painful relationships for me. And, but I couldn't pinpoint it, right? I couldn't put my finger on it. But the other thing that now as I've looked back over that time, that I realized is that the other thing that would automatically bring me to tears would be if I was watching something on TV or in a movie, and there was the idealistic version of what the father-daughter, or the idealistic version of what the husband and wife relationship looks like. And so if I was seeing that depiction, it would just make me just like sob uncontrollably, right? And never could put my finger on it. Right? I know a lot more about it, and I understand why that was happening. The thing about those years that really bothered me the most, and this is one of the reasons why I sort of hold on to the couch therapy phrase when I describe it. It's just two things that I'll say. I mean, the first thing is that I didn't have the ability to help the therapist, right? I just wasn't in that place. And part of that is my journey. It wasn't my time to heal until I reached 50 when I walked into that hypnotherapy room that day. And so I wasn't going to make progress because my life has been about suffering for 45 years and I'm still in my suffering, even though I'm trying to get help, right? So no matter what I'm saying and what I know now and what I'll talk about the difference in trauma therapy, I was just never going to get any help then because it wasn't my time to heal, right? So I do need to say that because that is English. And I couldn't help the therapist because I couldn't say to them, this is why. Right? But what I will say about that, and this is the part that's frustrating to me, and I think this is really where I think people experience this when they go to get therapy. And this is why they don't stay in therapy, right? So, and I say stay in therapy. I've now been in therapy with my trauma therapist in June, coming up on 6 years. And I don't see that ending anytime soon, and I'll talk about that in just a minute about why that is. But the therapy process is difficult. And so if you don't have someone who you are connecting with and who is able to help you pull out what's going on, you're not going to make progress. That can be very frustrating. And so we leave. I'm not making any progress. Nothing's happening.
It doesn't
And that's
work.
what happened.
Yeah.
5 years. It didn't work, right? This is crazy. Yet I still had this pull, this urge to be in therapy. Or there were times when I had my ex-husband urging me to therapy or marriage counseling, whatever it was, right? Going through it in a lot of different ways, but not making progress. Not one time in those 25 years did any one of those therapists say to me, "You're in my office week after week and all you do is cry. Why? Let's dig into the reason why." Literally, Chrissy, nobody ever asked me that question. This is weird. It's not normal. Let's dig into it. Right. And so that is frustrating for me when I think about that now, looking at all of those years. Right. And could I have progressed or gotten onto my healing journey sooner? Perhaps. But again, I've already said that I don't think it was my time. Right. Not until I went to hypnotherapy. Trauma therapy, a couple of things about that. I'm going to talk about rapport again because, it is the most vulnerable of relationships, right? I mean, this is the person, if you engage with the provider and the therapist the right way, this person knows more about you than anyone else, and it's not your good stuff, right? It's the painful stuff. It's the things that you've done that you're ashamed of, embarrassed about. It's things that have happened to you that you don't want to talk about. It's emotions that you wish you didn't have. It's painful emotions, painful events. It's all that stuff that's coming out. And because you need raw vulnerability to really progress, you must have someone who you have rapport with. You actually like this human being and you can build trust with them and hopefully build trust fairly quickly. Right now, my advice is that, if you find yourself in a place where you have rapport and you like the person, you should move toward trust quickly. Right. And even if you have to make yourself a little comfortable, if you're somebody who doesn't normally trust, and that's normal for us, things that we've been through, you should still try to push yourself on the trust issue because that person is there to help you. And the quicker that you can build that rapport and get to that level of trust where you can be completely vulnerable, the faster you process. Because as I already said, when you start speaking that stuff, when you start getting it out of you through words, that is freeing. It's liberating. Right?
Yeah.
But in order to be able to do that and to really be most effective, you need someone who's really trained, right? As a trauma therapist. And even better, if you can find somebody who understands your particular traumas and also the particular survival mechanisms that you've leaned on the most in order to survive your life, right? Because they're familiar with those things. They've worked with other people with those same types of challenges and survival mechanisms. And so they recognize them and they know how to help you through them, right? And so I don't know that anybody I ever worked with in those 25 years before nobody met all of that. I can tell you that. Maybe, they had one part of it or another part of it. Right. But, my therapist, Monica, is the first person who I've worked with who has brought all of that together in a way that really has helped me to progress, and so I'm talking about, I hope everybody who's listening to this or watching this hears me say, it's not just the provider. And a lot of times that's who we blame because when we're in our suffering and our pain, that's what we do, right? We blame the other person, right? That's why I say that you're not really ready to heal if you're focusing on the people who hurt you. You're ready to heal when you're ready to focus on you. And that includes not, my therapist isn't any good because you're not progressing. You must engage. You will not progress. You will not get the full benefit if you don't engage with it. But again, that requires a level of trust and raw vulnerability from you to be able to give to the person who's trying to help you.
Wow, that was such a good point. You're right. And it's just like with your physician, if you don't tell them everything that's going on, they can't really help you diagnose the situation. And recently with my coactive training, that's one of the things too, is the coach or the coachee is responsible for their forward movement. You're just facilitating that. You're the one evoking that or invoking it. I want you to talk about why you call yourself a mentor versus a coach.
Yeah, this sort of goes back to something that I said earlier about no magic bullet, no process, no steps that you can go through to heal and be healed. To me, so the notion of a coach is somebody who's going to help you set goals and move toward those goals, right? So first of all, there is no, ultimately there is no goal because there's no destination on the healing journey, right? I mean, the goal is to continually evolve to become healthier, more loving, more able to be in loving relationships, giving and receiving, and however that is supposed to show up in the type of relationship you're talking about, even business relationships, right? That is an ongoing process, right? And so the coaching is sort of, there's like a finite end. We're going to set some goals and we're going to work on getting to the end of those goals and then we're done, right? Mentoring is really more about giving people your life experience, right? And helping them to grow by sharing what you've been through and what your life experience has been. And that's what I do. I share my lived experiences with people, in particular, the healing journey that I've been on. And as it continues to go, I'm sharing that all of the time, right? And so I'm doing a lot of different ways. But for me, I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm going to tell you what's going to work for me. But if you notice, when I talk about what's worked for me, I talk about it in the context of the HEAL framework: building hope, building and fostering hope, evolving and learning to love. I don't say anywhere in there, it's, trauma therapy or, my human design and gene keys work that I've done to understand that aspect of who I am. I don't say anything. I mean, I will share those experiences that I've had because I want people to understand how they can help you in a healing journey. But I'm not going to say, well, I did this, and so you should do it, right? Or you set a goal, and so I think this is the way you should get to the goal. I'm going to mentor you based on my experiences of how I've walked this journey to figure that out for myself, to figure out what tools work for me and how I'm going to progress. Now, the mentoring, the idea of a mentor, when I work with people, I will help them to work through why a modality may not be working for them, right? So trauma therapy, when we've just talked about it, would be a great example. And I've had plenty of people I've had this conversation with where I can tell, talking to them, they're stuck in a couch therapy place and they need to move to the proper therapy for whatever it is that they're dealing with, right? And so we'll talk through that, right? And I'll help them to explore and figure out what isn't working and to take ownership of that modality. And if they need to change it, whether that's changing the provider entirely, changing the modality entirely, or as in the case with me in trauma therapy, setting some boundaries and parameters, which I did with Monica, my therapist. There were certain things about, I had a lot of success with EMDR with her, and there are about the way that EMDR worked that I did not want to use. And, it's a lot about processing particular events, which means you have to remember the event. And I suffer from dissociative amnesia. And so a lot of the events for me, the details of events are not there. And so, and I, when I first started working with her, I didn't know if that was because I was repressing the memories. That's kind of the operating assumption that I was under. What I've come to understand about me, which is probably more likely the case for me, is that when I'm in a traumatic experience or I perceive a threat, I just leave. My brain just disengages and goes there. So physically I'm there. And actually, interestingly, I can hold the emotion. Like I know what emotions I had in that exchange and whatever was happening, but I cannot give you the details of what happened. It was something I work on because I don't want to be in that place anymore as an adult. Know what am I actually experiencing when I'm having these emotions, right? Being able to bring it all together. But I didn't know that in the beginning. And so I said to her, if my brain is keeping me from knowing this, it doesn't think that I need to know this, or God doesn't think I need to know this for some reason right now, I'm going to go picking at it. So we were not able to use event-based EMDR except for the first event, which I vividly remember, which was being abused by my grandfather. We were able to process that one based on the event. But after that, I had to work off of emotions. And so I would gather the emotions that we were working on in real time. I'd take like 6 or 8 weeks to gather like every instance that, let's take shame, for example. Every instance that I would feel shame, I was like furiously writing it in my journal, what I called collecting my bucket of shame. So it'd be, silly things like I'd be, riding down an escalator and I'd look over at a woman who would be wearing a dress and my brain would go, ooh, I don't like that dress. I would never wear it. And I would immediately feel the shame of judgment, which I've worked through, right? And now I understand it's just me observing that that's not my style. I was saying, oh, she looks ugly. I was just like, that dress, I would not wear that dress, right? But for me, it was shameful in the moment when it was happening. And so I would write that down. And so I had like this bucket of these real-time shameful events that I gathered up, and that's what we would process. And when I did that, I was really able to also just let the entire idea of that emotion, the pervasiveness of that emotion in my life just go away. right? To where
Wow.
shame is not really a thing for me anymore that I deal with, right? So it's being able to take control of a modality and figure out why isn't it working for me, right? And it may just be just ain't going to work for you. It's not one of your tools, right? And that may be what the answer is. But people need help figuring that out.
Yeah.
And people need help figuring out why am I not progressing here and what's an alternative, right? And that is me sharing my life experiences, right? What I've been through to help people to be able to figure that out, which is much more of a mentoring process than coaching, saying these are your 1, 2, 3 goals that we're focused on for the next 6 months. Because, oh, by the way, the other thing about goals in coaching, it's somewhat time bound, and there is no time boundedness on healing. We're all moving at our own pace, right? And so that idea just doesn't resonate with me in terms of coaching people on healing, right? Really to be a mentor for people and to serve them in that capacity is really what I'm here to do.
I love that. I love that you talked about the shame and how it's not really an issue for you anymore. And I would love to dive into that a little bit, because I know there are going to be people who hear that and go, what? What does that even, how do you even do that? And I understand what you're talking about, because you're able to recognize it and not sit in it. And that's what I
Yes.
think, like, people get the misunderstanding. It's not that you don't recognize, oh, okay, that wasn't a behavior I really like to have, or that's not really who I want to be. All right, moving on. At
Yeah.
least that's what it is for me, is that I can recognize it. Like, oh, I really don't like that I did that, but I'm not going to beat myself up for a week about it. I'm just going to, okay, let's explore maybe why that happened. And then we'll course correct and move on. But yeah,
Yeah.
sitting in that emotion is just not helpful.
It's not helpful. It's not helpful and I was going to say this earlier about the, energetic and vibrational frequency of emotions, right? We're talking about being able to sort of, move what's happening in us or happening around us, just sort of the science behind what's happening. The energy that emotions put out is all part of that, right? And so shame is a lower vibrational frequency. It's a lower level energy, right? And it doesn't feel good. It just doesn't, right? Because those types of emotions don't feel good, right? And there's a reason for that. There's science behind it, right? We're in a lower vibrational state, right? And so not sitting in that emotion allows us to not be in that state, right? To move out of it and get into the love-based, shame is a fear-based emotion, get up into the love-based emotions that carry those higher vibrational frequencies. That's really what we're trying to do as we heal. So we feel better, right? I mean, that's really what it's about, right? Joy, love, peace. That's all up there in the higher frequencies. I think the example that you've given and what you've touched on, that's the hardest shame to get past. And that's the shame that we have for our own actions and our own behavior, right? But what I would, secondarily then, but equally as hard for some of us to deal with is the shame that we're carrying because of what other people did to us, right? And so, the thing about that shame is, that's not ours, right? What somebody did to us that caused us pain, that was abusive, traumatic, in some cases, criminal. When they do those things to us, that's them violating us, right? And any shame that we carry related to that is completely misplaced. Yeah, we carry it, and I did. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I've done that. I've been in that place, so I definitely understand it. But what I know today is that I was carrying shame that belonged to someone else, and that is sort of the one of the cruelest things about being a survivor, in my view, is that people hurt us, but we carry those emotions. We carry the shame. We carry the guilt. We carry the fear, right? We carry the smallness. We carry the imposter syndrome, right? All because of what other people did to us, right? Which is just a cruel irony of being a survivor.
Yeah, it's like another layer of them hurting. It's like the initial hurt and then the continued hurt.
100%, right? It controls us. It becomes all consuming. It wrecks our life because of what you did to me, right? And that was one of the pivotal things about, I was talking before about seeing survivor stories and seeing that they were healing. That was the moment I was like, this is complete and total BS. I'm living my life this way because of what somebody else did to me, and I'm just not doing it anymore. I don't want this. Get it off of me. I was like, get it off. Take it off. I want to be done with it.
Monkey.
Yeah, exactly. Right. A long process to get there, but that I got to that point. Right. And with shame, that is so true about that emotion when it's coming from the place of what somebody else did to us. Right. Now, I acknowledge and I said, and I know because I've lived in this place too, that the things that we do that we carry shame for, that's really hard to get past this because it requires us to forgive ourselves. the pivot where that becomes easier, at least where it became easier for me, is when I came to accept myself as a survivor and to understand that the way that I was living, choices that I had made, all my survival mechanisms that were unhealthy that I had used, when I realized that I was only engaging in my life that way because I was a survivor of what somebody else had done to me to pour this pain onto me, that allowed me to begin to forgive myself as a survivor. Right. And I talked about that mirroring concept before, seeing yourself as a survivor and being able to give that to the other person. You're releasing them. Right. People call it whatever you want to call it. I call it letting go. Right. So some people call it forgiveness, release, whatever you want to call it. And I don't want to get hung up on the word forgiveness and about forgiving because a lot of people struggle with that. Right. And no, I will never forgive the acts that somebody else did to me. Right. And because I can't forgive what you did to me, as a human being, what I want to do is I want to let you go. I want to let your soul and your energy go, break the connection to me. In order for me to do that, I need to change my emotions about you. And as I see you as a survivor, just like I am, and I accept myself and I surrender to letting all these things that I'm holding over my own head, shame being one of them, as I'm letting that go, I'm letting you go as well. And I'm letting those emotions of that other person go, right? So what I learn about being able to move forward and heal a relationship with someone who's hurt me, I apply to myself. Oh, my grandfather was a survivor. That's why he hurt me, because he's a survivor, right? And I then lived my life in all these awful ways because he made me a survivor, right? So the shame that I have carried with what happened to me at his hand is gone. And also the shame of the way that I lived my life, I can let that go because I realized I was acting as and living in my unhealthy survivorship, as I've called it.
Yeah.
Right. And we slip back sometimes, I mean, we do. Sometimes we go back and forth. And so we may find ourselves doing something that we're not proud of. We might even feel some shame. But again, those tools that we have will help us to move through that much more quickly.
I love it. I love it. Well, is there anything that we haven't gone over today that you are like, I really want to make sure that the listeners, knowing specifically most of the listeners are women, wanted to hear or wanted to share?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'll touch on, and I've said, a little bit about this, about, sort of love being the destination. And, if there is a destination on our healing journey, which is a lifelong endeavor, as we've said, but if there is a destination, the destination is love. And to know love in a way that we can fully show up in loving relationships. And I've already said this, all sort of relationships, right? When I talk about love, and I think, men and women are both susceptible to this, but I see it a lot with women. The first thing that we think about is our partner, right? And actually for men, I think the first thing they might think about is mom, right? And so some may think about their significant other first, but just sort of generally, if I'm going to put a gross generalization out there, that's where I think it would be, right? And, none of those are the first place that we should really be seeking to experience love and understand what love is, and then how to participate in love, right? And so the very first place that we have to focus on is self-love, right? So for me, it's been a journey of understanding that the supreme source of love, the ultimate source of love, is God or the universe, higher power, however you're connecting with that concept of a higher power. When I'm talking about this, whatever God or the universe means to you, knowing that that is the ultimate source of love and from where all love comes from, and the intention for our world to be a loving world. Right now, as humans, we've broken that down, right? We've shattered it. We do all kind of awful things that are not of love. And so, and a lot of the surviving, right, that shame we just talked about as a survivor and what we experience, a lot of that is not of love, right? And the things that we do to survive are not of love. And so the whole healing process that goes through self-discovery and accepting ourselves as survivors and releasing those lower level emotions that we're carrying with respect to ourselves, really that bind our heart and keep us from being able to love. We're letting that go, releasing all of that, right? And as you do that, then, when you're learning about who you are, that's developing self-love for you. And that is paramount and the first place that we have to be. You can't, my experience, and I will go to my grave believing this, you cannot be in a loving relationship with anybody else if you don't love yourself. it must start there, which is why the healing journey is so important, right? Connecting to the spiritual source of love and then learning to love yourself. Once you've done that, then you can begin to explore what does it mean to show up in love in the other types of significant relationships that we have in our.
Well, that was a golden nugget to end on. I'm like, that's going to be a soundbite.
It's important.
Well, Beth, where can people reach out to you to connect with your healing framework?
Yeah. So my website is empoweredsurvivors.com. And you can find me on YouTube and TikTok and LinkedIn by the social media handle at Beth Jones Healing Mentor. Exactly as you see it there on the screen, except without the slash mark there in all one word. Beth Jones Healing Mentor.
Awesome. And I know your podcast just made a big jump to a bigger market. Tell the listeners about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's fun. I'm on a mission to get this message, what we've been talking about today, my healing message, out to millions of people, as many people as I can possibly reach. So in early February, I went on to a TV network platform, internet-based platform called braveheartstv.org that's their website. So it's Bravehearts TV is the network. And currently you can find them on Roku and Amazon Fire. If you don't, you obviously can go right to their website and get right there onto the network and watch the different channels that are there. Mine is there. You can get to it through my website as well. So it's a distribution channel. I'm really happy about the platform that I'm on, just to continue to extend the reach of the audience that I'm trying to get to. What I really love about it is that we are heart-centered and service-oriented in our missions. And so, Bravehearts TV Network is affiliated with Brave Hearts, which is the cancer research organization for childhood cancer, right? The research organization. And so, everything that when I participate and everything that I do with Brave Hearts TV Network has a service, heart-centered service, philanthropic aspect to it. And I really love that. So our missions are very much aligned around empowerment as well. So it's a great platform for me to be on. Moving on to TV, I have no idea where this journey is going to take me. I've been along for the ride as God has seen fit to show me where I'm headed next. So I don't know, maybe I'm going to have my own talk show at some point in time.
That's
I'm just now. So I don't know. I don't know what's happening. We'll see what's coming. But it's great. So my show, you can get it it's on YouTube. And you can also get it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but also this fun platform. If you just want to experience that through Roku or Amazon Fire, even through my website, there is a link to the TV version of the show through my website. Just kind of a fun way to watch. It's different
Probably
from what we
more fulfilling on a soul level than Netflix or some of those other channels.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's exactly right. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest. You had so many nuggets in there. Oh my gosh, the snippets are going to be amazing because you just had so many wise things to say. So thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here, Christine. Thanks so much for having me.